Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure and privilege to introduce today's luncheon speakers. István Stumpf, among many other accomplishments, served with great distinction for many, many years on the Hungarian Constitutional Court. He will speak for István, about 20, 25 minutes, something like that. Right? And then in a format resembling last night's event, Martin Klingst, whom you've already met, who graciously agreed to do double duty at this conference, will sort of have a conversation with István about his remarks and the sort of general situation of integration in Europe and across the world. And there'll be time for audience questions and conversation with the audience. With that said, István, please. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Mark. Okay. Thank you, Mike. Thank you very much for the invitation, and it was a pleasure to be here, and it was a very interesting conference, and I hope that what I am going to provide for you during the lunch is will be not so good dessert. I think not so sweet dessert, which I am going to provide. So the title of the conference is a new area of disintegration. Before giving you an answer, we need to take a step back and ask some other question. What is disintegrating and why? Is it good or bad? What, if anything, should be done about it? In my presentation, I approach this question from my own professional and cultural perspective, that of former justice of the Constitutional Court of Hungary. I held this position 9 years, and it was a very turbulent years. We just introduced some kind of new constitution, which replaced the so-called communist origin constitution. I think there was the heavy discussion about that, why we need a new constitution. And we said that we remain the only country in Central and Eastern Europe which has an old constitution. The old constitution which was passed during the system changing. Lots of things changed. One is not, that the capital of Budapest, the capital of Hungary. But that provided some kind of transitory constitution. The idea was that after that, we are going to accept the final constitution, but unfortunately, the political circumstances not allowed to provide the new constitution. And 2010, when the ruling party, the conservative ruling party, got a 2/3 majority, that provided the opportunity to pass the new law, new fundamental law. We have a very good historical tradition of the public law and the constitutionality, but in 1949, we passed the first written constitution. That was the communist constitution. Until that, there was a historical constitution, like a British case, there was no written constitution. And I think this kind of constitution is very much showing we would like to finish the system changing, and the new generation, which was the young Fidesz generation, decided that we need the comprehensive constitution which provides some kind of opportunity to identify the most important constitutional values. The significance of drafting and enacting the sovereign constitution with democratic legitimacy hardly be overstated in history of any nation, and Hungary especially. The Magna Carta played a very important role in the British development in Hungary. The Gold Bowl played a very important role, more or less the same time when the Magna Carta was passed. The reason why I have speaking about that is that I would like to approach those kind of issue which is going on today, the identity and the sovereignty point of view. I propose to make sense of extensive debate on the rule of law, as well as the European parliamentary election. What will be the consequences of the European parliamentary election? Let me start with the rule of law. The rule of law is a fundamental concept of governance and the statecraft, and universally recognized norm among the democracies. It is essentially contested concept. There are constant debate about what does that mean. Today, only the agreement among the legal scholars about the rule of law is there is the disagreement what about this actually means. Francis Fukuyama argued that three most important elements of the political development in the history of mankind were the state, the rule of law, and the accountability. According to him, the principle of the rule of law has its origin in the organized religion, which was able to create a set of rules independent from the state, its legitimacy. For the contemporary political science and the constitutional law, questions about the state, the rule of law, the accountability, and the relationship with each other are still among the most interesting and challenging questions. In the last decade, the discussion about the rule of law have become the part of the political agenda on both sides of the Atlantic. Both sides of the political spectrum make accusation regularly against another for a lack of respect for the rule of law. Let's a few examples. In the US context, the electoral integrity has been one of the most contentious topics of the last few years. Election integrity is seen by many as the important product of the rule of law. Voter identity law and the regulation and the legal status of the mail-in ballots harvesting are considered to be the most important rule of law issues. The rule of law is especially important in the election integrity, since the elections are the cornerstone of the democracy. In Europe, the election integrity has not been an issue recently. Instead, the discussion about the rule of law have largely revolved around the judicial independence, the civil society, and the media freedom, particularly in Hungary and Poland. The third interpretation of the rule of law prioritized the global governance over the national governance. I think one of the biggest discussion in Europe, what will be the future of Europe? This will be the communication and the cooperation between the nations, or we are going to create some kind of global infrastructure, some kind of federal Europe, which gives up the autonomy and the sovereignty of the nation state. I think today we are living in an age that similar to what Ronald Reagan described in the early 70s. He had a very interesting word, the silent revolution, and he spoke about that there was the generational change among the society, and the people, especially the young people, is much more concentrated on the post-material values, not the material values. In the last decade, we have the conservative forces gaining grounds, and there was the sovereign nation which got much more support. The Brexit referendum framed by the UK Conservative taking back the control. Donald Trump was elected in the US presidency using the slogan, "Make America Great Again." The national identity has become the focus point of the political battle worldwide. Europe is struggling for identity. In the recent decade, Europe has lost its role as an exemplary model and innovator, has created a background, a power system that lacks democratic legitimacy. This system is almost exclusively interested in establishing a federal structure above the member state. That's some kind of administrative state in Europe. And the bureaucracy, without any legitimation, make a decision, those kind of decision, which is the responsibility of the elected person. Regularly used to ask that who is going to say the final word. But I think what is going on, the technocrats, the bureaucrats have a power, much more power, to make a final decision than the elected politicians right now. So what we are experiencing today, in effect, not a crisis of constitutionality, but the crisis of identity. The debates about the rule of law, in fact, debates about the value system. This is a war that is being fought on the grounds of sovereign nations versus supranational conception of statehood, sovereignty, and democracy. Hungary has, of course, has a own conception of the rule of law, and Hungary has been characterized as a problem of the child among the liberal globalist circles, and long been criticized that not following the rule of law. I can confirm you that according to the overwhelming majority of the Hungarian electorate, the rule of law perceived as just and appropriate in fine in Hungary. To understand what the rule of law is perceived as just and appropriate by Hungarian electorate, a couple of facts need to state it about Hungary. To give you an idea of Hungary, it's somewhat smaller than the state Indiana, with the population of New Jersey and the GDP of Nebraska. We are a landlocked nation whose energy security can only be guaranteed through the import. This makes Hungary a rather vulnerable country, or to compare Hungary with the energy rich maritime Norwegian, we have twice the population, approximately 1/4 of the Norway's territory and 1/4 of its GDP. Historical differences are remarkable. While the US was the definite winner of the 20th century, Hungary was clearly its loser. After the First World War, Hungary lost 2/3 of the territory and its 1/3 of the population, and the communist dictatorship eliminated the freedom of speech, the freedom of religion, the freedom of movement, the freedom of enterprise, and the private property. Many people fled Hungary, especially after the 56th revolution. There was a point in time when Cleveland, Ohio, was the city, the second largest population of ethnic Hungarian in the world. Precede after Budapest, the capital of Hungary. It was not until the fall of Berlin Wall. The transition to the market economy was long awaited, but not without challenges. So that several Hungarian thinks the electorate expect the government to stand for Hungarian interest, and in doing so, safeguard the Hungarian sovereignty. At the same time, the Hungarian electorate expect the government to harmonize the national governance, national interest with demand of the global governance to the extent possible. The revisionism or the other forms of aggression are rejected, but so is giving up self-determination. The government that views its role a limited administrative centralized global governance has proven unacceptable to the Hungarian electorate. In the term of vision for EU, produced a strong preference for the European Union of nations. Let me talk about a little bit the result and the implication of the European election. The question that most of you are interested in, what happened in June 9th of the other side of the Atlantic? We all have heard that wide speculation about there would be the right-wing breakthrough with the so-called radical right gaining grounds previously thought to be impossible. But in June, once again, the European people gave us the reminder that change doesn't come overnight. However, marginal right wing did gain some ground, but not even close to the degree of the polls and the forecasters would have you believe earlier. The balance of power didn't change in Europe, not meaningfully at least. What are the implications of this? The center-right European People's Party and the left-wing Socialist Democratic Party still remain the most important player in the European Parliament. Perhaps the most important development is the right-wing European Conservatives and the Reformist group that's filled up in ranks with a new member from Brothers of Italy, the party of Italy's Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, came in the third place, edging the liberal Renew Europe faction with the Macron party members in ranks. The question is whether the EPP, the European People's Party, and the ECR will work together in the key issue. That's the good question in the Europe future. Another important development is the success of the Identity and the Democracy Party, primary compromise of French National Front of delegates. Every left-wing parties, including the Socialist Democrats and the Green and the Left Party, lost seats. The three groups lost net 27 seats. 27 might seem marginal compared to the total 720 seats, but it's still interesting that none of them were able to make any gains, and this is the worrying sign for the left in Europe. And if you look at the national consequences of the European election is much more important than the total landscape of the European politics. It's obvious conclusion that the Europe swung a little to the right, but not nearly enough to tip the balance of the power in Brussels. We accept that the EPP and the SD fraction with the Green or the Liberals and the Renew Europe to group to maintain the comfortable majority. That's happened. They make an agreement with the most important position, but I think this was not the very democratic way. That's the biggest critics of them. The primary question for the right-wing parties is whether the European People's Party will break with its previous policy and return the right in the future or continue to seek allies on the left. By seeking alliance on the left, as expected, the European People's Party delayed the real right turn, and so impact strengthening the European right will be felt in the long term, not overnight. This, however, opens up the political scape for the real conservatives in Europe, because void remains with the leftward movement of the EPP can be and will be filled with the various conservative parties from all around Europe. In my view, underlying this issue was the question whether the governments of the European countries were viewed by their respective electorates as sufficiently representing the interest of the electorate or not. While many are trying to figure out how the newly elected members of the European Parliament will be aligned, in my view, it's most important to assess the election result as a referendum on national governments in the European Union. Some government emerged, strengthened. Italy clearly belongs in this group. Others have been outright rejected the electorate, most notably these France and Germany, two leading powers in the European Union. As for Hungary, Viktor Orban's government won the clear victory, but receiving 10% less of overall vote margin than 5 years ago, while the opposition parties were utterly declaimed by the newcomer to the Hungarian politics. What come after that kind of things? When the European politics is going to go? In one word, contestation with increased risk of instability. In some case, this situation is the lame duck who have obviously lost power support and now have a little loose seek to undermine those parties that won the election. In the other case, the opposition parties that score significantly better than the member of the ruling coalition may be attacked, or popular resistance may be going on. This may result is incoming member of the parliament beating the actual lame duck. So the lack of capability of leadership and meaningful dialogue is likely. The polarization be expected to mount between the nation, given the many destabilizing issues that should urgently be dealt with. This is more than inevitable. What to expect in the long term? In the time of crisis, the leadership is required. The leadership understood earning, willing cooperation of the people, takes share viewpoints and share goals. Any manipulation that seeks to lay a trap for representative and parties that scored better than regaining governments undermining this. Thus, present condition might first lead anarchy. But the wake of anarchy and dangerous instability, the self-determination and the nation-state will make comeback. The coronavirus pandemic has shown that the nation-state remains the only solid foundation for crisis management and international cooperation. My conclusion is that the European Parliament election offered a great litmus test for whether the European people are satisfied with their government or not. The greater right-wing breakthrough was expected, but instead of leap, we have taken just a step. Still, we need to keep our eyes opening during the coming month. The EU faced many challenges in the changing world, and it can be only emerge victorious and become strategically autonomous player if preserve the strength of the diversity. The Hungarian experience shows that if there is to be sustainable stability, the interests of the electorate need to prioritize whilst harmonizing the national and global governments. Sustainable stability can be attained in a world that is safe for cooperation and dialogue. Such a world is increasingly out of reach today, but will very likely emerge as an outcome of the painful overthrow that ahead us. We're living in an interesting time. Aim the turbulence and the long time expect both pessimist and optimistic, globalist and sovereignist approach to prove on the right and luckily. On the longer term, I anticipate renewal of the national state. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, do you hear me? Good. Well, Professor Stumpf, thank you so much for your very interesting remarks. And you would probably forgive me when I play now the devil's advocate and step into the shoes of the European Union and Brussels. But to say so to our Italian friends, if you score a goal,
really?
Just shout out.
Okay. I might cry.
And you may also cry if Switzerland scores a goal. You pointed out that undoubtedly this European election leads to changes, and that the center-right and the far-right gained, and the center-left and the left lost. Not as dramatically as some had thought, but this is the result. And you said this will lead to new thinking or a renewal of national states. So where do you think the path forward is? Where do you think that Brussels will lose some of its competences and give them back to the nation states?
You mean the center of the European Union, the leadership, the committee of that? Are you talking that one?
Yeah, well, I'm talking about, you know, when you say we see a renewal of the nation state, and nations will regain some of the sovereignty. Where do you see this in the context of the European Union?
I think if you look at the result, the national result of Germany and French, this was, and also Netherlands and the other countries, it's very much sending the message from the ordinary European peoples that they not satisfied the achievement of the leadership, but in spite of this, Ursula von Leyen and the other key leaders already going to get the support to continue that kind of activity without any consultation. Those powers who got much more support generally than previously. I think if they are just focusing on the past and focusing on the continuing the war, and also to reducing the sovereignty of the nation state, I think that kind of uprising is going to increase.
Right, but
that's the reason why I am saying that the balance between the federalistic approach and the so-called sovereignist approach should change.
Yes, but where will it change and where should it change? What you're doing is a political analysis of where the power shifts are, but what are the consequences?
Right now, I think there was no sign which showing any fundamental change.
Where would you see the fundamental changes?
After this, after the French election, and after the German election, that will be the second round, and that the European election, I think, will be change the balance.
But what powers should be transferred back to the nation states?
What power?
What kind of power? Where should the nation states regain some of the sovereignty? In which fields?
I think that is the fundamental agreement which gives the nation state sovereignty. And if somebody would like to reduce that, I'm going to give you an answer. Some things that the European Court of Justice made a decision that they punished the Hungarian nation, the government, 200 million euro because they didn't implement the decision of the migration things, which we have to incorporate several migrants in Hungary. This is the good question. What's going on if the government is going to go to the National Constitutional Court and ask the National Constitutional Court that this decision is violating the Constitution, violating the constitutional identity, and ask to declare the unconstitutional what the European Court decided. That's happened in Germany in the other case. And if we are going to do that, I think this is the war, because the migration issue is one of the core issue in Europe. And as far as I realized, they would like to move those direction, which was the Hungarian direction, to give much more support at the border. And this is the only way where the nation state is going to make a decision, let in or not let in.
But when you look at what happened since 2015 on the migration field, you see that a lot of countries have changed the border controls and the enforcement of their borders. So this is nothing actually new. The new asylum compromise sees outside control of migrants,
Yes.
and then a distribution system. And as in the past, that some of the European countries have denied taking in refugees, now there is some kind of financial mechanism in the new law that has been passed that forces countries that are not willing to take in refugees at least to financially participate or pay fines.
But you are talking the illegal refugees, or you are
No,
talking
I'm
those
talking
refugees?
about the ones that are let in, that have been granted asylum at the border. Then you have the distribution system of those that are granted asylum, and the question is who takes them in, and the countries that deny will be forced to financially contribute. So do you think that's an infliction, that is a violation of national sovereignty, or do you think that's in the context of what a body like EU with 27 member states has to agree on?
Yes, I think that kind of policy which Angela Merkel provided, that invited the migrants to Europe, it's caused big turbulence in Europe, and I think it was a bad strategy.
But you know that the friend of Viktor Orban, Giorgia Meloni, of a right-wing government, supported this compromise and thinks it's a good solution.
Yeah, but it's not the end of the history. And also there is the Migration Pact, which was already passed by the European Union, and is also creating some kind of request for the national state. But I think this is understandable if some nation wouldn't like to change the nationality of. We are just 10 million people. If 1 million migrants is, because it's required, going to go to Hungary, it's changed the whole composition of population, which is not acceptable.
Well, 1 million refugees would not be required to go to Hungary. It's in proportion to the population.
But,
so it might be a couple of thousand.
But 100,000 the same. If it's going to go to the small community and living there, why don't you accept that this is the responsibility of the nation state to make the decision for whom allowed to come and living in Hungary in the long term?
Well, I'm just challenging you, and you know that I'm a huge fan of Hungary, but I'm playing now the devil's advocate. And Giorgia Meloni, who is the leader of the right movement at the moment, thinks that those compromises on a EU level are necessary to get the migration system under control and not leave it to individual countries. But
we will see. I think it's the migration issue is going to change the next future, and we will see that we could find a compromise or not.
But as you stated at the beginning, the EU is based on principles, which is freedom, security, and law. And there is the EU treaties, and there is the Charter, and other, like the European Convention on Human Rights, that form the fundamentals of the EU, and everyone who's a member state agrees on. Hungary is now the only country in the EU that is facing an Article 7 procedure, which means because of violation of some principles or assumed violation of some principles, at the end of the Article 7, which is the strongest, the strongest consequence the EU can take, is taking away a voting right. So just based on those fundamental principles, the EU, and that the EU is not just Brussels, it's the European Council, so all other member states say that Hungary is violating the judicial independence, and I just quote, because of the establishment of some bodies like the National Judicial Office, that's its president nominated by the ruling party with far-reaching rights of appointment, promotion, and transfer of judges.
Lots of things changed during the last 2 years. The Hungarian government tried to fulfill all the requirements which the European Union sent it about the judicial independence and the others. So I do not realize that kind of violence. Sometimes I am very much seeing that the European leadership using that kind of process as a political weapon against Hungary, because sometimes Hungary just saying those kind of things which the leadership wouldn't like to hear. And this is not, I think it's not an acceptable thing.
But you see that, for example, in Poland, where the same measures were undertaken, the new government under...
This is the
Prime
double
Minister
standard.
Tusk,
So they didn't change anything.
they changed dramatically the way they control the judiciary.
Not.
Oh, yes.
And they didn't change the law, because it is important.
Well, they changed the control of the Constitutional Court. They changed the way of replacing judges. They changed the way of the body that
Hungary also changed the way, but I think the European Union using the double standard. If they would like to punish one nation, they use that kind of things against the nation, and the other, because politically is much more closer to the leadership, they give up that kind of approach. So that's the double standard, and also they are using the double standard in other European countries. Well, but the Hungary, it's a small nation, and they would like to use Hungary as a sample.
Before I give the questions to the audience, two more questions. Media freedom. The European Union, the European Council, the Commission says that Hungary is violating the media freedom because of a centralized media control. Do you think it's also...
centralized media control, what does that mean?
That means establishment of a national media and info communication authority with far-reaching rights when it comes to significant powers over content regulation, licensing, and fines of media.
So many Hungarian opposition media is working, heavily criticizing the Hungarian government. I do not think that in Hungary the media freedom is not valid values. It's working, and if you just look at the newspapers, the network media, and the TV, you can find those kind of issues, which is very much showing that there is a very pluralistic media system.
According to the EU and non-governmental organizations, the independent media has been cut by 2/3 in the last years and has been in the hands of news outlets, including TV, radio, and print media, are in the hands of Orban's friends.
Who is the Orban friends? Everybody would like to be a friend of the prime minister, and these are.
This could be a problem. Everyone wants to be a friend.
This is the behavior of the people. I think this is not a very strong argument that this kind of Orban friends. It's who is not Orban friends? The opposition who would like to change him.
Well, let me take the last point: academic freedom. Targeting specific universities was criticized by the EU and many others. Especially the Central European University left Hungary. And so the control of higher education is being heavily criticized.
The Central European University left Hungary because the government would like to introduce the very similar type of norm with the Central European University, which got a very special zone during the Liberal government. And they just would like to get the same standard than we are using the other universities who is active in Hungary, I mean the foreign universities. For 2 years, I was responsible person for the system changing on the Hungarian university. 21 university left the government or the state-owned university system and moved to the so-called foundation-based university system. I spent 2 years there, visited 21 university. This 21 university, they belong to the two-thirds of the Hungarian students. And there are several universities who got much more freedom using that kind of new structure, not violating the university autonomy and the academic autonomy as well. And I think we will see after 5 years that it will be the successful project or not. But my personal experience, not very much support your criticism and idea.
My last point before I give the floor to you. According to internal Hungarian reports, one of the biggest problems of Hungary is the exodus of a young generation. About 500,000 Hungarians, which is about 5% of the Hungarian population, is abroad, especially young people studying abroad. And according to surveys, the majority is not willing to come back. And they're cited. Why? The reason they give is the lack of democracy and the rise of illiberal democracy in Hungary, and that they fear for their basic freedoms. Do you think this is fantasy, or is there some reality to that?
Let me start my personal experience. I have got 4 children. One, the older children, my daughter, she is living here in Washington. She is an executive director of Hungarian Foundation. She was working for the Hungarian embassy for 4 years, and later on, she has got an American husband, and they were working here and regularly going to go home and also using that kind of experience with them. If you are talking about that numbers, yes, several people left after the secondary school and go to the university. I do not know how many came back and how many will come back again, but I think the Hungarian government would like to provide much more better circumstances for those people who spend 1, 2, 3 years in the foreign universities and trying to use that. But this is not just a Hungarian phenomenon. This is the Central and Eastern European people, young people would like to go that, and they are very much criticizing the politics. Don't like that kind of circumstances, but they have some personal experience and they could compare what's going on abroad and what's going on at home.
After the 1956 experience, when Hungary was occupied by the Soviet Union, mainly or in the Warsaw Pact, how come that Hungary's government is backing pro-Putin policies and criticizes the European Union for supporting Ukraine?
I do not know that this is the pro-Putin politics, which you said, that Orbán Viktor, he was the most anti-communist leader during the system changing. He was the speaker when Imre Nagy, who was the minister of 56 revolution, was a funeral. There was a funeral party. And several moderate leaders heavily criticized Orbán that he is very much violating those kind of peaceful transition using his very anti-communist and anti-Russian rhetoric, because he said the Russian troop has to leave Hungary as soon as possible. I am talking about 89. I do not think that Orbán Viktor personality changed, because this is the basic character of the personality. But Hungary, as I tried to explain, it's a very depending country. We very much depends on the gasoline and the other things of Russians, and also there is the atomic power, which is also built by the Russians. So we have to be very careful. And I think this kind of pro-Russian behavior which you mentioned, it's generally not true. But yes, we have to have a national interest and try to make a balance between that kind of things.
Just to give you one other example, the small country of Moldova, which is not a member of the EU, opposed Russia and Putin, was heavily dependent on Russian gas and oil. Russia cut it all down, and Moldova is now supported.
How many people living in
Through
Moldova?
Romania. I said it's a small country, but Hungary is a small country too.
10 million people. It's a bit so. Okay.
Well, okay. I finish my role as the devil's advocate and give the room to you.
I can't resist to ask a question about the rule of law. So in a nutshell, somebody else stand up if I can. There are microphones on each side over here. Should I do that? Yes, I think so, just for the recording purposes and for the whole room. Should you line up there? Yes, please go ahead and line up at the mics.
I don't think this one's. Is this one working? Yeah, perfect. So I can't resist to ask you about the rule of law. In a nutshell, you've said the rule of law is an essentially contested concept. No one really knows what it means. The majority of Hungarians think it's fine. There's no problem. Now, given that we don't think of the rule of law and the judiciary typically just as another political branch where, you know, courts do whatever the majority of citizens want them to do. Is this really a kind of satisfying portrayal? As long as the majority of citizens want something, does anything go in terms of rule of law? And I'm asking in particular because Martin has already raised a few questions about, you know, how that majority comes about. If we have this kind of presumption that, okay, whatever 50% plus one citizens say about the rule of law is what it should be, then of course that presupposes a free democratic debate, and with universities being forced out of the country, with media restricting discourse, there might be some legitimate questions as to whether that majority consensus is still, you know, valid.
I think the rule of law is a good shape in Hungary. Why? Because yes, four times the ruling party got a 2/3 majority, the free election, and the last election, this European election, that kind of very new party got 30% support. This is the new TISA party. If the rule of law is not, and the electoral system is not democratic in Hungary, how could the party which was appeared just 2 months ago in the Hungarian politics could get 30% if this kind of regulation is not filling the rule of law requirement? How?
Sorry, let me just rephrase my question. So are you saying that as long as the majority of people think this is what courts should be doing, this is what they should be doing, anything goes?
If the majority is going to say that this is the good things, I think there is the opposition which regularly criticizing the government, and also there is the opposition media which regularly try to do that. That's provide the opportunity for the alternative party to gain 30% in the last election.
Okay, thank you. Gentleman over there.
Yes, I'm wondering, has the European Union established any term limits for the leader of any individual country that's within the European Union? Like here, we used to have as many terms as a president could possibly win, you know, in an election. FDR, Franklin Roosevelt, 4 terms. So there's one case, but I wondered, has the European Union set any limit? Perhaps they ought to do that.
So, sorry, a term limit for whom? As
The leader of a country,
Leader of the countries.
like the prime minister.
So you are saying that if the European Union is going to decide that in the member state countries there should be introduced the rule that only one term allowed for the prime minister or for the president? Who?
Yeah, exactly. It
This
doesn't have
is-
to be one term. Here we have 2 terms, 8 years in the United States.
Okay, but that
I don't know all the limitations in each country over in Europe. You know, they evidently haven't established.
this is the
Leaders have been in for many years.
according as a sovereignist, according my opinion, this is the clear and clear validation, clear violation of the national sovereignty. This is every country has the right to decide about how long possible to stay. In Hungary, there is just a 2-term opportunity for the president, but not the prime minister, because the prime minister is elected by the majority of the parliament. This is the parliamentarian system, not the presidential system. The presidential system should have been different, but in Hungary, there is just a 2-term allowed to the president of Hungary, which is a ceremonial position in Hungary, not too much right, constitutional veto, political veto, but it's a not very strong vetoes. That's the reason why the prime minister has a very strong power, chancellorian type of power. And I think sociologically the Hungarian system is a semi-presidential system. Probably that's the reason why you are asking that it would be a good idea to limit the term of the prime minister. But I never ever seen that kind of things that after the democratic election, the parliamentary majority elect the prime minister, and you have to control and limit that kind of capability of the parliament. I do not think that this is a good idea.
Yeah, I would assist you that is, you know, the basic principle that if you have a parliamentarian system and the chancellor or prime minister is elected by the parliament, there's no term limit, but presidents have term limits. If they have political power, like in France, 2 terms, or if they're just a representative figure, like in Germany, just 2 terms. But this is a very different system, and I think that's based in the way the government is founded. Alistair.
Thanks very much, and thank you very much for your presentation. And is it working? Yeah, my question follows up on our dinner conversation last night. I asked a question of the Hungarian ambassador in Brussels last week. I'm not sure if everybody here knows, but on the 1st of July, Hungary will take over the presidency of the Council of Ministers, not the European Council, the Council of Ministers. So that means that the Hungarian ministers will chair every council: trade, environment, energy, tax, ECOFIN, the whole thing. The Hungarian ambassador will chair COREPER, which is the main managerial group of ambassadors, and every working group, over 500 working groups, will be chaired by Hungary. And my question is really, in view of the difficult situation in which Hungary finds itself in dispute with the European Court and with the European Commission and the other member states, would it not be more appropriate at this moment for Hungary to cede the presidency to another state until these disputes are resolved? My question to the ambassador was, do you not think that the credibility of Hungary as council presidency is affected by this ongoing dispute? And I'd like to get your views on that, if possible.
I do not think so. I think there is a very strict rule where and what countries is coming. And yes, the Belgian Prime Minister said to Orbán Viktor that, don't you think that the next half year you will be the boss of Europe? Yes, nobody would like to be the boss. This is a much more technical responsibility. So much work to get together, and also commonly decided about what should be the priority of the presidency of Hungary. That will be the how to improve the competitiveness of the European Union. There was several discussions today and yesterday about that, and also how to rethink the migration issue in Europe and how to cooperate with the African countries to start to stop that kind of process there. So I do not think that this could be a good idea and not acceptable. And what's happening if Le Pen is going to win in French? And do you think that after that the French leadership should give up that kind of position which they represented previously, or what is going on in Germany?
Sorry, let me just say, you didn't mention recent poll conducted across Europe by Ipsos, the polling company, where they found that in every single member state, except Luxembourg, including, by the way, the United Kingdom, they included the UK in this, the swing in favor of European integration, the European project, now is greater, the support for that is greater than the support for most national governments, which suffer from let's say, a lack of credibility amongst their population. And so, interestingly, although there are populist governments being elected, including Le Pen and Meloni, these leaders, including Le Pen, have decided to support the euro, support the European army in support of NATO, support the European project, because that's what the young people of those countries want. And that is true in Hungary as well.
That's right.
Where would Hungary be without the cohesion funds from Brussels, contributed by the rich countries of Europe, that is dramatically transformed the Hungarian economy over the last 20 years since membership? So I really think, Hungary is in a quite difficult position, having benefited so much from Europe.
That's right. I hope that we could consolidate the situation.
Yeah. Is this on? Yeah. Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Judge Stumpf. We're two Hungarians here, but I'm not going to ask about Hungary, actually. I want to ask you a question about sort of your philosophy or how you approach the question of the interaction of national constitutional law and EU law. Now, the suspension of funds to Hungary and Poland, a lot of that was done by the EU that happened last year, was done on rule of law grounds and claims from the EU that aspects of what reforms of the judiciary in Hungary and Poland violated these norms. And then the counter argument from the governments was generally, these are national questions of constitutional law. It's not appropriate for the EU to intervene. Now, I want to put that aside, the specifics of Hungary and Poland, and just imagine, in the future, let's say 20 years from now, I don't know, Syriza comes back in some form in Greece. There's an extreme left government that comes in another member state, and they come up with some justification to get rid of a lot of judges, replace them with their cronies, some leftist judges. They, replace the prosecutors, start going after their political enemies. My question is, and what is your philosophy of the bounds of when it would be appropriate, right, for the EU to say, well, wait a second, what you've done with your judiciary is outside the bounds of what's acceptable in our union, and we can't fund you. What is the line, right?
Okay, as I mentioned before, I am the sovereignist people, and there was the huge discussion when I was the Justice of the Constitutional Court. We invited the President of the European Court of Justice in the conference about the European law and the national law and the national constitution relationship. My clear idea is, if the European decision, doesn't matter what institution is going to do, violating the internal part of the constitution, I think the last word should say the national constitution. But if that just violating the constitution, örökkévalósági klauzula, hogy hívják ezt németül? This is the
constitutional identity.
So that's the constitutional identity of the constitution. If it's violating that, I think the last word is in the hand of the national constitution. But just in this case, not all the regulation and the other. The Polish Constitutional Court made a much more strict decision, saying that the priority of the European law is not valid in Poland because the Polish law is the most important law. But my opinion is much more smaller. I just saying that if there is the conflict between the European regulation and the internal part of the Constitution, which means the constitutional identity, I think the Constitutional Court has the right to say the final word, not the European Court.
Thank you.
Thank you. So my question is, and please excuse my ignorance as an American who hasn't focused on focused on the EU. So I don't have a full good grasp of the history here. But how is it that the EU kind of morphed from, as I understood it originally, the EU, maybe I'm wrong here, was simply an economic free trade zone, right? It's economic efficiency. We all understand without the borders, no customs duties between countries. It's very efficient. Everybody gains from free trade within that zone. But now we have the EU is kind of like, is morphed, right, into intruding into and interfering with the internal affairs of its various constituents members. And my question is, how did this happen? Did the member states, when they signed up, did they understand that they were signing up to allow Brussels bureaucrats to come in and and issue these diktats on climate change and immigration and your judiciary and all these things? It's like sort of like NATO, right? You see these or any bureaucratic organization. This is sort of like a natural law things, right? They always try to expand their jurisdiction. They've got to find a new mission to justify the existence of the organization. Is that what happened to the EU? Or was this, when the member states originally created this, was that they understood that this is what we're buying into? We're signing on to this project to have these bureaucrats in Brussels dictate our internal affairs beyond economic matters.
That's one of the most serious challenge in Europe, that the so-called non-elected bureaucrats and bureaucrats making a decision instead of the elected persons.
Well, maybe it was the European Parliament, but in the relationship.
Well, one point, but I think we're going to discuss that. But I think it's a total misunderstanding that there is a bureaucracy that is removed from everything else. Yeah. There's a parliament, there is a European Council, everything is linked back to the governments. So without that, no decision is going to be drawn. So to think that there is another planet that rules the earth is sorry, but this is not based on the facts. Michael.
Yeah. This goes in the same direction as Miller Baker's question, but it picks up on something that Florian Becker remarked or sort of suggested 5 panels ago, and that came up again in the conversation. It's about media diversity within each member country in the European Union, and a lot of people in Europe haranguing Hungary for lack of media diversity or excessive state ownership, right? Florian's point was, look, why is that a concern for the European Union? I mean, if you live in American higher education, the most irritating fact of it is every university must be diverse in exactly the same way. And that seems to be the European Union's attitude vis-a-vis media diversity in the member states in the EU. I can understand that under certain conditions. The country Martin and I grew up in had exactly in our youth 1 public TV channel, no private TV channels. It acquired a second TV channel because Konrad Adenauer thought the first one was run by socialists, and he was right about that. All the major media in print were run by one company, Axel Springer. In those conditions, you might worry about media diversity, right? And the European Union of today would bring down the hammer on you. Hungary, it's 10 million people. Everybody speaks English. The notion that you can monopolize anything inside Hungary let alone the media landscape is borderline insane. So why does the EU worry about it? Why not just, act on Florian Becker's instinct and say, look, there are things that are really, it might be good to have a little more genuine diversity. Countries just run in different ways, and especially if they have no practical way of acting actually in a sort of autocratic, authoritarian way, we ought to tolerate a whole lot more divergence. Sorry, that was not a question, that was a diatribe.
Yeah, thank you very much.
And moreover, I've
Okay.
asked the last question.
Okay.
I abused my.
Well,
I apologize.
thank you so much.
I abused my position twice.
Now we can get in a real discussion. It's I was provoked to go to the microphone because of that remark that European bureaucrats are governing now into the internal affairs of European states. And Martin already made clear this is simply not the case. Every law, every regulation passed by the European Union has to pass two hurdles. The first is the European Parliament, and the second is the European Council, which is the Council of the European Governments. And this precisely reflects the double nature of the European Union, which is at the same time a union of states and a political union with a directly elected parliament, directly elected by the European citizens. So it is a hybrid organism. I doubt that I'm not a European federalist in the sense that Europe should become a state. But please, we should not go back from this hybrid, very innovative construction to a simple union of state. Because, Mr. Stumpf, when I please make a remark on your understanding of sovereignty. The European nations can only act as a sovereign political subject if they join their forces and join their destiny and join their policies. It's about shared sovereignty, and only if we are ready to delegate some parts of our national sovereignty to the European decision-making, the European institutions, the common European policy, we will be able to act as a subject, as a political player in the new globalized, multilateral world. So this is the whole idea. And to go back to this kind of 19th century understanding of political sovereignty, will Europe make a punching ball in global politics? So it is, one thing is to keep up and to develop further this specific kind of European integration with hybrid character of the Union, developing common policies in the real crucial areas like security and defense, common trade policies, common climate policy, and I also would say common migration policies. These are clearly areas when we only can act together. And the second one is to defend the very core, the founding act of the European Union as a union of liberal democracies. And here comes the problem with the current Hungarian government. You probably know that Mr. Orban intentionally coined the phrase illiberal democracy. And he is constantly challenging this very idea of liberal democracies. And there is a tendency, not only in Hungary, it was also the case in Poland, to go towards this kind of, what I think is an oxymoron, a liberal democracy challenging the independence of the judiciary, challenging the independence of the press, and trying to restrict civil society, taking control over civil societies. And these are three critical elements where the European Union cannot compromise. And states who don't want to respect these principles have to decide if they want to keep member of the European Union.
Okay, Ralph, thank you.
Nobody discussing this kind of free element, but I think if we are starting to discuss the nature of the democracy, and especially the liberal, especially the latest development of the defenders of the individual rights, very heavily and very aggressively trying to defend that, and they are just in this way very much questioning the liberal democracy. Doesn't matter what does that mean. I think the illiberal democracy, we just would like to send the message that those kind of things, which sometimes the liberalists asking to follow their norms compulsory. If you are not going to follow what they are doing, we are illiberal and we are undemocratic. So I think it's a long history, but this is not the place where we could discuss that. But I think there is the sovereign right. It is not going back to the history. If you would like to strengthening the sovereignty of the nation state.
Well, thank you so much. And I just want to say this internal European fight is something you can probably transfer to the American fight and to your next election, and between a liberalism and illiberal democracies. It's a phrase Trump also likes to take up. But all the best, and give a big round of applause. And what is the score in Italy?